I've been having these weird thoughts lately. Like, is any of this for real or not?
Could it all be a bad dream or a nightmare? Is it my imagination, or have we lost our minds? It's surreal. It's just not believable.
What we need to do is to begin to deal with the rest of the world as equals, and we don't do that. We spend more as a nation on defense than all the rest of the world put together. Who are we afraid of? Who are you afraid of?
The Federal Reserve is now a government within a government. It is totally out of control.
Why don't we just open up the Constitution and read it?
We either have constitutional government or we don't.
Right now, we're building an embassy in Iraq that's bigger than the Vatican. We're building 14 permanent bases. What would we say here if China was doing this in our country or in the Gulf of Mexico? We would be objecting. We need to look at what we do from the perspective of what would happen if somebody else did it to us.
The Federal Reserve is no more federal than Federal Express. But yet it has the power to determine the direction of use of money in our economy.
If you were president, would you work to phase out the IRS?
Immediately.
That's what they call a softball.
And you can only do that if you change our ideas about what the role of government ought to be. If you think the government has to take care of us from cradle to grave, and if you think our government should police the world and spend hundreds of billions of dollars on a foreign policy that we cannot manage, you can't get rid of the IRS. But if you want to lower taxes, and if you want the government to quit printing the money to come up with shortfall and cause all the inflation, you have to change policy.
What would be the first two things you would do if you were in Mr. Bernanke's seat tomorrow morning?
I would abolish the Federal Reserve and I would resign.
But eventually you don't need the Federal Reserve. No, it's caused too much trouble. Central banking has always been harmful. It's a seductive way of financing big government. Conservatives love it because you can pay the military bills. Liberals love it because you can pay the welfare state bill. But it's all deception and it's all a tax. It eventually destroys and hurts the very people you're trying to help. You try to help poor people by giving them stuff for free, but you end up giving them inflation. They're the first ones to lose their jobs. They're the ones who suffer the most from inflation. We have inflation today much more so than anybody admits, because that's why the cost of medicine is so high and the cost of education is so high. It's the devaluation of the dollar. So with all this good intentions of helping poor people, the very people who are doing this are actually making it much more harmful and hurting those they want to help.
The issue of drugs is a public health issue. Addiction is a public health issue, not a criminal issue where we throw people in jail and criminalize them to no advancement to the people.
Blacks make up 14% of those who use drugs, yet 36% of those arrested are blacks, and it ends up that 63% of those who finally end up in prison are blacks. This has to change. We don't have to have more courts and more prisons. We need to repeal the whole war on drugs. It isn't working. We have already spent over $400 billion since the early 70s, and it's a wasted money. Prohibition didn't work. Prohibition on drugs doesn't work. So we need to come to our senses, and absolutely, it's a disease. We don't treat alcoholics like this. This is a disease, and we should orient ourselves to this. That is one way you could have equal justice under the law.
And the Federal Reserve was promised to stabilize the value of the dollar.
How does it do that? I mean,
well, it doesn't. This is the thing. It's done the opposite. It has taken the value of the dollar and lost 95% of it. What you could buy for $1 in 1913 would cost you $20 today. We assume that inflation now, it's because it's become something that we've all known for our entire lifetimes under a fiat currency system as a given, and it's not. We don't have to have a system that's like this. In fact, our Constitution specifically gives Congress the power to create money and coin money out of gold and silver, have it backed by honest commodities, and therefore not subject to the whims of people that can now create money out of thin air.
What if our foreign policy of the past century is deeply flawed and has not served our national security interests? What if we wake up one day and realize that the terrorist threat is a predictable consequence of our meddling in the affairs of others and has nothing to do with us being free and prosperous? What if propping up repressive regimes in the Middle East endangers both the United States and Israel? What if occupying countries like Iraq and Afghanistan and bombing Pakistan is directly related to the hatred directed toward us? What if someday it dawns on us that losing over 5,000 American military personnel in the Middle East since 9/11 is not a fair trade-off for the loss of nearly 3,000 American citizens, no matter how many Iraqi, Pakistani, and Afghan people are killed or displaced? What if we finally decide that torture, even if called enhanced interrogation technique, is self-destructive and produces no useful information, and that contracting it out to a third world nation is just as evil? What if it is finally realized that war and military spending is always destructive to the economy? What if all wartime spending is paid for through the deceitful and evil process of inflating and borrowing? What if we finally see that wartime conditions always undermine personal liberty? What if conservatives who preach small government wake up and realize that our interventionist foreign policy provides the greatest incentive to expand the government? What if conservatives understood once again that their only logical position is to reject military intervention and managing an empire throughout the world? What if the American people woke up and understood that the official reasons for going to war are almost always based on lies and promoted by war propaganda in order to serve special interests? What if we as a nation came to realize that the quest for empire eventually destroys all great nations? What if Obama has no intention of leaving Iraq? What if a military draft is being planned for the wars that will spread if our foreign policy is not changed? What if the American people learn the truth, that our foreign policy has nothing to do with national security, that it never changes from one administration to the next? What if war and preparation for war is a racket serving the special interests? What if President Obama is completely wrong about Afghanistan and turns out worse than Iraq and Vietnam put together? What if Christianity actually teaches peace and not preventive wars of aggression? What if diplomacy is found to be superior to bombs and bribes in protecting America? What happens if my concerns are completely unfounded? Nothing. But what happens if my concerns are justified and ignored? Nothing good. And I yield back the balance of my time.